Emma Watson sat alone in her London apartment, sipping a cup of chamomile tea as early sunlight spilled through the tall windows. The world knew her as the intelligent, composed actress and humanitarian, calm, logical, and fiercely principled. But that morning, a thick envelope resting on her doorstep changed everything. It was a subpoena. The envelope bore the seal of the United States Supreme Court. Confused but intrigued, Emma peeled it open with trembling hands. The court was summoning her to appear in a high-profile defamation case, not as a witness but as a defendant. The allegations? That Emma had publicly questioned the ethical operations of a billion-dollar biotech company in a recent speech at an international summit. The corporation claimed her remarks had caused financial damage and public distrust. Emma was stunned. She had always believed in using her voice for the greater good, and never imagined that expressing concern, rooted in verified reports, would land her in court. Yet the date was set. She was to appear in Washington, D.C. in front of Chief Justice John Roberts, a figure known for his stern composure and strict adherence to legal procedure. As her legal team scrambled to prepare, Emma spent the following nights rewatching old court testimonies, brushing up on constitutional law, and rehearsing answers in front of the mirror. She wasn't just preparing for a legal battle, she was preparing for the fight of her public life. When she boarded the plane to Washington, her usual serenity was mixed with a subtle storm of adrenaline. Cameras clicked as she stepped through the terminal. News banners already blazed, Emma Watson versus the system, and Hollywood meets the Supreme Court. And yet, behind her calm gaze, Emma wasn't thinking about her career or the headlines. She was thinking about the millions of people who had no voice, no platform, no legal shield. This trial for her wasn't about image, it was about principle. The court date was set for Monday morning. The courtroom would be full: journalists, officials, law students, and corporate representatives. And at the center of it all, Emma Watson, standing alone at the defendant's table, prepared to redefine silence as power. As Emma Watson stepped into the towering halls of the Supreme Court, the sharp echo of her heels was the only sound in the vast marble corridor. The grandeur of the chamber, lined with columns and soaked in history, felt like stepping into a gladiator arena. Only here words were the weapons. Her black blazer fit perfectly, projecting grace and authority, but even her practiced poise couldn't mask the subtle tension in her eyes. The room was packed. Every seat was filled. Reporters with notepads ready, spectators on the edge of their seats, legal analysts whispering predictions. The air buzzed with anticipation. Yet all went silent when Chief Justice John Roberts entered the room. His presence was electric: sharp gaze, composed expression, and a reputation that demanded attention. He looked at Emma with a clinical curiosity. To him, perhaps, she was another celebrity in the spotlight for overstepping boundaries. A performer caught in a system she didn't understand. But she returned his gaze without blinking. "Watson," Roberts began, "you stand before this court accused of defamation that allegedly caused substantial financial harm to a legally operating entity. Do you understand the severity of this charge?" "I do," she replied, voice steady, clear, and firm. The opposing counsel, a slick corporate attorney with a silver tie and an arrogant smirk, launched into his argument. He painted Emma as reckless, a well-meaning activist turned dangerous influencer. He referenced her speech at the summit, claiming it was not just expressive, but incited boycotts and public outrage. Emma remained still, taking notes, occasionally raising an eyebrow but never interrupting. Every sentence thrown her way was a chance to listen deeper. She was not here to act, she was here to listen, dissect, and dismantle. When her attorney finally stood to speak, he began to walk through a meticulous defense: reports, statistics, and the ethical precedent for speaking out on matters of public concern. But before he could fully dive in, Justice Roberts raised his hand. "Watson," he said, "this court would like to hear directly from you." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Emma slowly rose to her feet. The room held its breath. No script. No safety net. Just a young woman standing in the most powerful courtroom in the country. And with that, her voice, measured, elegant, and unwavering, began to carve its way into legal history. Emma Watson stood tall at the center of the courtroom, her hands loosely clasped in front of her. The mahogany floors, the towering bookshelves, and the flags behind the bench all seemed to fade into the background as every eye focused solely on her. There was a quiet defiance in her expression, not arrogance, but a resolve built over years of standing for what she believed in. "My statement," she began, "was not designed to harm. It was a cry for awareness, not war. Her voice wasn't loud, but its clarity sliced through the tension like a blade. She spoke about the responsibility of influence, about the ethical weight of silence in the face of injustice. She referenced real cases, victims, statistics, not as emotional appeals but as anchors of truth. Her tone was calm, measured, never theatrical. But beneath every word was a current of fire. Justice Roberts leaned back slightly in his chair, his fingers interlaced under his chin. He wasn't nodding, but he was listening. The prosecutor rose with a scoff, clearly irritated by the respect Emma was commanding. "Miss Watson," he said, "with all due respect, this is not a TED Talk. This is the Supreme Court. You're not here to inspire, you're here to defend." Emma turned to him slowly, unflinching. "I'm doing both," she replied. "Because sometimes the truth must inspire in order to defend itself." Gasps rippled through the spectators. Even Justice Roberts's jaw tensed for a brief second. The prosecutor pushed forward, his voice rising. "Do you deny that your speech directly contributed to financial damage to the plaintiff's operations?" "I don't deny that people listened," Emma responded. "I spoke about human rights violations. If that caused people to change their actions, that says more about the truth of my words than my intention." It wasn't just a defense, it was a challenge to the system. She wasn't asking the court for mercy. She was asking it to acknowledge reality. By the end of her response, a pin could have dropped in the silence that followed. Justice Roberts didn't say a word. But his eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in thought. Something had shifted. The courtroom was no longer certain of what the final verdict would be. Because Emma Watson had just turned the trial into something bigger than herself. Justice Roberts sat silently in his chambers, the courtroom echo fading in his mind like the final note of a distant song. He wasn't a man who was easily moved. His 40 years in law had hardened him against emotion. But something about Emma Watson's testimony stirred a faint memory, buried beneath years of case files and political calculus. He opened an old file on his desk, not Emma's but one from decades ago. A case involving a whistleblower, a woman who had spoken out against a pharmaceutical company that had knowingly distributed defective medication. She'd been crucified in the press, labeled reckless, unstable. But the truth she exposed had saved thousands. He had presided over that case too, and ruled against her. Now, with Emma's voice echoing in his thoughts, he began to wonder, had he made the wrong call back then? Was this trial another chance, not for her but for him? Back in the courtroom, Emma sat alone at the defense table. Her attorney, a nervous but well-meaning associate named Harris, whispered urgently, "We should prepare a motion. Something softer." The judge seemed tense. Emma shook her head. "I'm not here to make it easy. I'm here to make it count." Meanwhile, the media outside was in chaos. Protesters had gathered, some in support, others accusing her of endangering public order. "Free speech or reckless speech?" the headlines read. Social media was ablaze with hashtags. Hashtag Emma trial, hashtag justice or silence, hashtag Watson versus system. Inside, Justice Roberts re-entered the courtroom. His eyes scanned the room, reporters, lawyers, clerks, but they paused when they reached Emma. She met his gaze calmly, and for a fleeting second, there was a mutual recognition, not of agreement but of understanding. "I've reviewed the supplemental material from both parties," Roberts began, his voice steady. "But this trial has become more than a matter of law. It has become a test of our collective conscience." Murmurs rose instantly across the benches. Emma leaned forward. Harris looked like he might faint. And yet Roberts continued, unfazed. "Before we move forward, I want both sides to reconsider what justice means in the context of influence, speech, and truth." He adjourned the court for 48 hours. As Emma stepped out of the courthouse, a young girl, no older than 10, held out a hand-drawn sign, "Thank you for speaking." Emma paused, smiled, and gently took the girl's hand for a moment. Whatever happened next, she had already won a different kind of verdict. The courthouse was unusually quiet for a case that had set social media ablaze. Behind closed doors, however, a different kind of storm was brewing. Judge Roberts sat in his private chambers, flanked by 2 senior judicial clerks and his longtime legal advisor, Miriam Langston, a woman known in D.C. circles for her unflinching legal mind. "She's not wrong," Miriam said, breaking the silence. "Technically, Emma Watson's actions may border on defiance of existing laws, but her motivations are aligned with public interest. The legal framework doesn't always catch up with moral urgency." Judge Roberts, sipping lukewarm coffee, stared at a folder labeled simply Watson. "That's what worries me," he murmured. If I punish her, I send a message that truth is dangerous. If I let her go, I may be undermining precedent. Outside the chamber, Harris, Emma's young attorney, paced the hallway, whispering frantically into his phone. She's refusing to compromise. No settlement, no plea. She wants the judge to see it through. In a conference room 2 floors down, the prosecution met in a hushed strategy session. Assistant Attorney General Dale Rivers looked tense. We underestimated her. Her public appeal is volatile. Every word she speaks becomes a headline. Back in her hotel room, Emma sat cross-legged on the carpet, her laptop open, video calls pouring in from global human rights groups and civil liberties attorneys. She took notes in silence, then closed her laptop and whispered to herself, the next 48 hours could change everything. That night, mainstream news anchors speculated endlessly. Has the justice system finally met its match? One anchor asked. Emma Watson is not just a defendant, she's become a symbol. Some called her a hero. Others said she was reckless. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. This trial had shifted from being a personal legal battle into a moral referendum. In a rare late-night statement, Roberts issued a formal request for expert testimony on historical free speech trials, signaling a more philosophical direction for the next session. The country was watching. But in the quiet corridors of justice, the people closest to the law knew, this case wasn't just about Emma Watson anymore. It was about the system's soul. As morning light filtered through the high windows of the federal courthouse, a palpable tension filled the courtroom. Spectators whispered. Journalists checked their live feeds. Judge Roberts entered, his face unreadable, and called the session to order. Defense may proceed, he said simply. Emma stood, calm and focused. Your Honor, she said, her voice strong yet respectful. We call our final witness, Oliver West. A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. No one knew the name. Not the press, not the prosecution. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. A man in his late 50s walked in, modestly dressed, slightly hunched, eyes that had seen too much. Emma gave a slight nod of encouragement. Harris leaned in and whispered, Are you sure about this? Trust me, Emma said. West was sworn in. State your name and profession, the bailiff asked. Oliver West, former surveillance analyst for the Department of Cybersecurity. Suddenly, the courtroom went dead silent. Emma stepped forward. Mr. West, did you oversee the classification protocol on the video I posted? Yes. Was the footage classified at the time of release? West hesitated, then said, No. It was downgraded 5 hours before the post. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Emma continued. Can you confirm that this reclassification wasn't publicly documented? Yes. It was buried in a bulk notice log, unreadable to the general public. Judge Roberts leaned forward, his voice stern. Why are you coming forward now? West looked directly at the judge. Because the system is broken. And I couldn't watch another truth-teller get buried by bureaucratic shadows. The prosecution fumbled to object, but it was too late. The damage was done. Emma turned back to the court. The truth was never illegal. It was simply inconvenient. Reporters typed furiously. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #WestTruth and #EmmaUnfiltered began trending in real time. For the first time in the trial, Judge Roberts paused for longer than a moment before dismissing the witness. This court will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments, he said, and stood. Emma locked eyes with West. Thank you, she mouthed. As she left the stand, Emma passed the prosecution's table without looking. She didn't need to. The storm she unleashed was now unstoppable. This wasn't just a defense. It was a revelation. The next morning, the courthouse steps were flooded with protesters and supporters alike. Placards reading "Truth is not treason" and "Let Emma speak" waved in the early sunlight. News vans lined the street. Global media had descended on the trial. The atmosphere wasn't just charged, it was electric. Inside the courtroom, Emma sat silently, surrounded by her legal team. Her face was composed, her hands folded. Across the aisle, the prosecution looked visibly shaken, unprepared for the storm Oliver West had stirred. Judge Roberts entered, face unreadable as ever. We will now hear closing arguments, he said. The prosecution went first, their voice shaking with the pressure. They stuck to technicalities, reiterating that Emma had bypassed protocol, risked international relations, and endangered security. But their argument felt stale, robotic, even hollow. When it was Emma's turn, the room leaned forward. She didn't speak from a script. She didn't read from notes. She spoke from memory. Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, this isn't a trial about documents, or digital policy, or classified versus unclassified metadata. This is a trial about moral clarity. She stepped away from the table and paced slowly, deliberately. I was told to look the other way, to stay quiet. That silence was safer than the truth. But when I saw what the system had done, what it was hiding, there was no choice. If telling the truth makes me guilty, then I'm proud of my guilt. A hush fell. I didn't just release a file. I released a mirror. And what people saw in that mirror scared them. Because for once, they couldn't pretend they didn't know. She turned to Judge Roberts. Your Honor, you can rule against me. You can convict me. But you cannot unring the bell. The truth is out. And I believe in time even this court will thank me for that. Silence. Then applause, muted but growing, from the back row. Judge Roberts banged his gavel once. There will be no demonstrations in my court, he said. But his voice lacked force. The courtroom adjourned for deliberation. Outside, the world wasn't waiting. Thousands were already treating Emma as something more than a defendant. She had become a symbol. And symbols can't be sentenced. The jury deliberation room was thick with tension. 12 strangers, now tasked with deciding the fate of a woman who had become a global flashpoint, sat in near silence at first. Some fiddled with pens. Others avoided eye contact. The room felt too small for the weight it carried. I say she's guilty, one man said. Clear violation of national security. A woman across from him replied, you think exposing abuse is a crime? Then maybe we're all guilty. Lines were drawn quickly. But it wasn't just about Emma. It was about what she represented. Truth against institution. Morality against legality. Fear against courage. Back in the courtroom, Emma sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap. Her attorney, Oliver West, leaned over and whispered, no matter what happens, the world heard you. That matters. In the judge's chambers, however, a different conversation was unfolding. Judge Roberts stood before a small window, watching the protesters through the blinds. The assistant clerk entered, holding a file. There's something else, sir. It just came in from the Federal Inspector General's office. Roberts raised an eyebrow. What is it? A formal report. Confirming that the leaked documents, every one of them, have now triggered multiple congressional investigations, including some that could implicate senior figures in national intelligence. Roberts said nothing. The silence in the room stretched out. He picked up the folder, flipping through it slowly. His face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened slightly at the edges of the pages. Do not file this yet, he said. Back in the main courtroom, the light seemed brighter. The energy heavier. Emma's eyes scanned the faces around her. Her brother sat in the second row, tears welling. A stranger passed her a folded note. You spoke for all of us. The bailiff returned. The jury has reached a verdict. Gasp. Shuffling. A ripple of nerves. Emma closed her eyes just for a moment. Outside, on the courthouse lawn, a sea of people grew silent as their phone screens flickered with the words, verdict incoming. But behind those chamber doors, the real storm had just begun. The courtroom doors creaked open as the jury filed in, their faces unreadable. The judge returned to the bench, gavel resting gently in his hand. Emma's breath caught in her chest. The noise in the gallery died instantly. All rise, the bailiff called. Judge Roberts nodded at the foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a gray pantsuit, who stood slowly with a white envelope in her hand. Her fingers trembled slightly. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? Roberts asked, his voice calm, practiced. We have, Your Honor, she replied. The bailiff took the envelope and handed it to the clerk, who unfolded the paper inside, then passed it to the judge. Judge Roberts glanced at the verdict. A flicker of something, surprise? Discomfort? Crossed his expression before he composed himself. In the case of the United States versus Emma Wren, he began, his voice measured, on the charge of unlawful possession and dissemination of classified documents, we find the defendant. He paused. The room held its breath. Not guilty. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Emma's knees buckled slightly as relief surged through her. Oliver West placed a steadying hand on her back. She whispered a single word, thank you, though no one heard it but him. The gallery erupted. Cheers, sobs, and stunned silence all swirled together. Flashbulbs lit up from press photographers. Outside, chants turned into cries of celebration. Justice for Emma? echoed in the air. But Judge Roberts raised a hand. Order, he said. The room quieted slowly. While this court recognizes the jury's decision, he continued, let it be known that this trial revealed vulnerabilities in our system that must be addressed. Transparency must not come at the cost of stability, yet silence cannot be the price of truth. It was a rare, unscripted moment from a man known for restraint. Emma turned to the crowd. Her eyes found her brother, her supporters, and even those who had doubted her. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She simply stood. Behind her, the judge glanced once more at the file from the inspector general, now hidden beneath a stack of papers. A storm was coming and he knew it. But for now the court had spoken. As Emma walked out through the courtroom doors, the world waited for what she would say next. She said nothing. And somehow that silence was louder than any verdict ever could be. Outside the courthouse, the steps overflowed with people, journalists, and flashing cameras. The sky was cloudless, but the tension in the air carried a storm of a different kind. Protesters who once chanted for Emma's arrest now stood frozen, unsure of what to feel. Others held signs that read, "Truth wins," and "One voice matters." Emma Wren emerged from the heavy wooden doors, flanked by Oliver West and her younger brother, Caleb. Her posture was calm, shoulders back, gaze forward. The crowd surged forward, microphones thrust toward her. What will you do now, Emma? Do you have any regrets? Will you sue the government? Do you feel vindicated? Emma paused at the top step. The world waited. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She held it up. On it, in thick black ink, were only 5 words. Truth needs no permission to exist. The silence that followed was thunderous. Some reporters lowered their microphones. Others whispered into earpieces. The crowd, stunned, watched as she handed the paper to a young girl in the front row, perhaps 10 years old, who looked at it like it was a treasure. Emma descended the steps slowly. With each step, the chants of her supporters grew. Her silence had become her brand. Her refusal to play the media's game was her protest. A week later, her face was on the cover of every major news magazine. The quiet whistleblower, they called her. She declined every interview. Government officials scrambled. A congressional hearing was launched to investigate the systems exposed during her trial. Judge Roberts was called in as a witness. When asked if he regretted not silencing Emma earlier, he answered simply, "I'm not sure I ever could have." Emma returned to a small house on the edge of Colorado, surrounded by pine trees and open sky. Her brother painted again. She gardened. Sometimes she answered letters from strangers. Sometimes she didn't. But one thing was certain. Emma Wren had changed the definition of courage, not through rage or eloquence or force, but through silence. And in that silence, a revolution had begun.